Blood pools in the Bucharest mud. The executioner's axe catches the morning sun, a blade sharp enough to split a man's spine in one clean blow. The crowd presses close, hungry for death. They always are. The condemned man kneels in the filth, hands bound, neck exposed. He's just another noble who bet on the wrong side. Another corpse waiting to happen in this slaughterhouse they call Wallachia. The executioner raises the axe. The crowd holds its breath. This is the moment. This is always the moment. But something goes wrong. The executioner looks down at the prisoner. Their eyes meet, and the big man, this professional killer who separated dozens of heads from bodies without flinching, starts to shake. His hands tremble. The axe wavers. Sweat pours down his face despite the autumn chill. The prisoner's eyes burn into him with an intensity that feels inhuman, like staring into a furnace. The executioner takes a step back, then another. Then he throws down the axe, screams something about demons, and runs into the crowd like a terrified child. The square erupts in chaos. Guards shout. The crowd surges, and the man who was seconds from death simply stands up, mud dripping from his clothes, and walks away. His name is Michael, and in this frozen moment, the future pivots. How does a man who survives his own execution end up conquering 3 countries, crushing the Ottoman Empire, and dying with his allies' blade in his back? Buckle up. This story has everything. Financial schemes that would make Wall Street blush, battles where frozen rivers turn into highways of death, a peasant revolution led by a cattle trader, and a betrayal so cold it makes Game of Thrones look like a children's cartoon. Before we dive into this blood-soaked masterpiece of ambition and tragedy, do me a favor. If you're fascinated by the kind of history they don't teach in schools, the brutal, unfiltered truth about power, smash that like button. Subscribe to Maproom Battles, because we're just getting started. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It blows my mind that we're exploring a 16th century Balkan warlord together, connected across centuries by our shared addiction to these insane true stories. Now, let me explain why that executioner ran. You need to understand the nightmare that was Wallachia in 1593. Forget the clean borders on your history books. Wallachia was a meat grinder. This place was wedged between 2 massive forces, the Ottoman Empire to the south, stretching from Baghdad to Budapest, and Christian Europe to the north, which mostly didn't give a damn about this muddy backwater. The Ottomans had conquered Wallachia a century earlier, but they didn't govern it like a normal province. They turned it into something far more sinister, a financial extraction machine. Here's how the scam worked. The Sultan in Istanbul didn't care about actually ruling Wallachia. He cared about cash flow. So instead of appointing governors, he auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. Every few years, sometimes every few months, if the Sultan got bored, they'd open bidding in Constantinople. Ambitious Romanian nobles would flock to the Ottoman capital like sharks to blood. They'd borrow massive sums from Levantine bankers, Greek merchants, Armenian moneylenders, even English diplomats looking for a cut. They'd outbid each other in a cutthroat auction where the stakes were life and death. The winner got the crown. The losers usually got the garrote. But here's the sick part. Winning was just the beginning of the nightmare. The new prince would return to Bucharest with a debt hanging over his head that would make a modern CEO sweat. He'd owe millions in today's money to creditors who expected repayment with interest. Brutal interest. The only way to pay them back was to strip the country bare, raise taxes on everything, sell monopolies, confiscate land from rivals, bleed the peasants until they had nothing left. And you had to do this fast, because the Sultan might replace you any day if someone offered him a better deal. It was a conveyor belt of tyrants. Borrow, pillage, repay, die. Then the next guy took his turn. Michael knew this game intimately because he'd watched it destroy his country for years. But he wasn't born a prince. He was born rich, filthy rich. Before he became a warlord, he was the Ban of Craiova, essentially the wealthiest businessman in Wallachia. He made his fortune trading cattle across the Danube, controlling salt mines, and lending money to desperate nobles. He understood finance, he understood leverage, and he understood that in this system, you either became the predator or you became lunch. The current ruler, a paranoid tyrant named Alexander the Bad, saw Michael's wealth and influence as a threat. He tried to eliminate him. That's how Michael ended up, kneeling in the mud, with an axe over his head. But when the executioner ran, Michael realized something crucial. Staying in Wallachia meant death by 1,000 cuts. The system would either kill him or enslave him. So he decided to do the most insane thing possible. He went to Istanbul. Think about that. The man who just escaped execution traveled straight into the heart of the empire that controlled his country. But Michael didn't go as a beggar. He went as a high roller. He understood that in the Ottoman system, everything was for sale, including loyalty. For weeks, he navigated the treacherous marble corridors of Topkapı Palace, bribing everyone who mattered. He bribed Sinan Pasha, the Grand Vizier who controlled the Sultan's ear. He bribed the harem officials who whispered pillow talk to the Sultan. He bribed the Janissary commanders who could make or break any ruler. And he made the Sultan an offer he couldn't refuse, a tribute payment so high it was practically impossible to collect. Michael promised to send more gold to Istanbul than any previous Wallachian prince. Sultan Murad III, always desperate for cash to fund his wars, loved it. He named Michael Voivode, Prince of Wallachia, in September 1593. But where did Michael get the money to bribe half of Constantinople? He borrowed it from everyone: Jewish syndicates, Turkish warlords, Venetian spies. He took out loans with interest rates that would make a payday lender blush. He effectively mortgaged his life, his soul, and the future of every peasant in Wallachia. The creditors were thrilled. They looked at Michael and saw a golden goose, a man so deep in debt he'd be their puppet forever. They packed their bags and followed him back to Bucharest, eager to start collecting. Michael returned to Wallachia in a procession that looked less like a coronation and more like a hostile takeover. He was surrounded by Turkish guards and a swarm of creditors carrying ledgers. They moved into the best houses in Bucharest, treating the capital like conquered territory. Michael immediately began the brutal work they expected: extraction. He raised taxes on chimneys, livestock, even the right to travel between villages. He unleashed tax collectors on the peasantry with ruthless efficiency. To the outside world, he looked like just another Ottoman puppet, bleeding his own people to feed the masters in Istanbul. The Sultan was pleased. The creditors were getting paid on schedule. The Habsburgs in Vienna wrote him off as a lost cause. Everyone thought they understood Michael. They were all watching the wrong hand, and what was happening with the other hand would change everything. While Michael played the obedient servant by day, he was preparing for war by night. He used the cover of tax collection to assess the military strength of every village. He secretly stockpiled weapons in monastery cellars. He reached out to the boyars, the local nobility, and convinced them he was their only way out of slavery. He formed a quiet pact with Sigismund Bathory, the unstable prince of Transylvania, who hated the Turks as much as he did. The tension in Bucharest became suffocating. The Turkish creditors and Ottoman soldiers stationed in the city grew arrogant. They harassed women in the markets. They looted shops. They beat locals who looked at them wrong. They were confident that the prince belonged to them. Michael watched it all with a stone face, his jaw clenched, saying nothing. He let them get comfortable. He let them believe they were untouchable. By winter 1594, the trap was set. The creditors were demanding their final payments. The Sultan was demanding even more tribute. The pressure was unsustainable, exactly as Michael had planned. He summoned his most trusted captains to a secret meeting. He didn't tell them to gather gold. He told them to sharpen their swords. The creditors were invited to the palace for what they thought would be a final settlement of accounts. They arrived expecting chests of gold and maybe some wine. They had no idea they were walking into a slaughterhouse. The man who had survived the executioner's axe was about to pick it up himself. The date was the 13th of November, 1594. What happened next would send shockwaves through 3 empires. Inside the palace, the main hall was packed. Levantine bankers in expensive silk robes, Turkish merchants counting their returns, Ottoman garrison commanders drinking Michael's wine and laughing about how easily they controlled this puppet prince. The smell of roasted meat and perfume filled the air. They were celebrating. In their minds, this was just another collection day. Michael entered the hall fully armored, his hand resting on his sword. The room went quiet, but not from fear, from expectation. They thought he was about to hand over the money. He looked at each of them slowly. These were the men who held the chains of his country in their ledgers. He asked his captain a simple question. "Are they all here?" The captain nodded. Michael stepped back and gave the signal. The doors slammed shut. Bars dropped into place. The chests of gold never appeared. Instead, Michael's guards poured into the hall with drawn swords. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a liquidation. In minutes, every creditor was butchered. Blood pooled on the marble floors. The financial chains that bound Wallachia were severed with steel instead of paperwork. But Michael didn't stop there. He ordered the palace cannons to fire into the quarters where the Ottoman troops were housed. The city erupted in coordinated violence. By sunrise, over 2,000 Ottoman soldiers were dead. Michael didn't just default on his debt. He declared war on the entire economic system of the Ottoman Empire. Now, you might be thinking, bold move, but isn't he completely screwed? The answer is yes, and Michael knew it. News would reach Istanbul within days. The Sultan's response would be apocalyptic. So Michael did the one thing the Turks didn't expect. He didn't fortify Bucharest and wait to be besieged like every other rebel in history. He attacked. This is where Michael stopped being a politician and became a legend. The Ottomans were used to fighting 2 kinds of wars: massive set-piece battles against European armies or crushing small peasant uprisings. They'd never seen a vassal state launch a coordinated blitzkrieg. Michael took his small, mobile army, maybe 10,000 men, mostly light cavalry and infantry, and raced south toward the Danube River. The Danube was everything to the Ottoman presence in the Balkans. It was a natural border, yes, but more importantly, it was a supply line defended by a chain of massive stone fortresses: Gheorghiu, Brăila, Harshova, Silistra. These weren't just castles. They were the eyes and ears of the empire, controlling all trade and troop movements. Michael decided to blind them. Winter became his greatest weapon. The Danube froze solid, turning the mighty river into a bridge of ice. Michael's cavalry thundered across the frozen water, striking Ottoman garrisons on the southern bank. Think about that for a second. This was technically Ottoman territory, part of the empire itself. A Wallachian prince was invading Turkish soil. It was unheard of. His forces moved like ghosts. They struck at dawn, burned supply depots, slaughtered garrison troops, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. At Giurgiu, Michael pulled off a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He dressed his men in Turkish uniforms stripped from the dead soldiers in Bucharest. They approached the fortress gates at dusk, speaking Turkish, pretending to be a relief force sent from the south. The gates opened. By the time the defenders realized the trick, the fortress was on fire. Michael's men seized Brăila. They sacked Turnu. They devastated the entire region called Dobruja. In a few weeks of winter campaigning, Michael effectively erased the Ottoman border security system. He captured massive stockpiles of weapons and, crucially, cannons, the tools he'd need for the real war coming. The psychological impact was devastating. For 100 years, people in the Balkans had lived in terror of the Sultan. They believed the Ottoman Empire was invincible, an unstoppable machine that crushed anyone who resisted. Now they saw Ottoman heads mounted on pikes along the frozen Danube. They saw mighty fortresses reduced to smoking ruins. Michael was broadcasting a message to every oppressed people, from Belgrade to Budapest. The monster can bleed. Back in Istanbul, the atmosphere shifted from annoyance to pure rage. Sultan Murad III died in January 1595, and his son, Mehmed III, inherited this disaster on his coronation day. The Wallachian problem was no longer a tax dispute. It was a strategic crisis. The breakdown of the Danube defense line meant the road to Istanbul was potentially open. If Michael's rebellion spread, the entire Balkan frontier could collapse. The Grand Vizier Sinan Pasha, a veteran commander famous for his cruelty and tactical brilliance, was given unlimited resources. He gathered an army that would make your blood run cold. Historical records suggest nearly 100,000 men, elite janissaries with their distinctive white caps, heavy Sipahi cavalry on armored horses, and a massive artillery train of siege cannons. His orders from the Sultan were simple and brutal. Don't just kill Michael. Erase Wallachia. Turn it into a direct Ottoman province, with mosques replacing churches and Turkish governors replacing Romanian princes. Michael had maybe 16,000 men, mostly mercenaries, Cossacks, and peasants with pitchforks. The math was impossible. As spring 1595 melted the snow and turned the ground to mud, the Ottoman war machine began its slow, crushing march north. Michael retreated. He gave up the Danube fortresses he'd fought so hard to take. He gave up the open plains where Ottoman cavalry would annihilate him. He pulled back into the forests and swamps of Wallachia's interior. He was looking for a choke point, somewhere numbers wouldn't matter. He found it at a small, insignificant village near the Nialov River, a place called Călugăreni. And here's where the story gets absolutely insane. August 23, 1595. The sun beats down on the marshes around Călugăreni, about 18 miles south of Bucharest. The air is thick, with humidity and mosquitoes. To anyone with military training, this looks like the worst possible place to fight. A nightmare of mud, tangled roots, and stagnant water that would bog down any army. But to Michael, it's a chessboard, and he's already 10 moves ahead. He positioned his small army on the northern bank of the Nialov River. Between him and the massive Ottoman force approaching was a single, narrow, wooden bridge. That bridge was the only way for Sinan Pasha's army to reach Bucharest. Michael placed his cannons in the tree line, perfectly hidden. He hid cavalry reserves in the dense forest. Then he stood on that bridge and waited for the storm. When Sinan Pasha arrived and saw the Wallachian army, he almost laughed. From his position, it looked pathetic. A thin line of peasants and mercenaries standing in mud. He'd crushed armies 10 times this size. He ordered his vanguard to attack, expecting to brush them aside in an hour. But as the elite Ottoman troops stepped onto the bridge, they realized the trap. The bridge was too narrow for their formations. Their greatest strength, overwhelming numbers, became their greatest weakness. Thousands of soldiers pushed from behind, crushing the men at the front into a deadly traffic jam. Michael waited until the bridge was packed with targets. Then he opened fire. Hidden Wallachian cannons unleashed hell. Iron balls tore through the packed mass of Turkish soldiers. Men were blown off the bridge into the swamp. The Ottoman cavalry, the pride of the empire, floundered in the marsh. Their heavy war horses sank up to their bellies in mud. For hours, the battle raged. Sinan Pasha, furious and desperate, threw wave after wave of men into the meat grinder, and slowly, the sheer weight of the Ottoman attack began to tell. The Wallachian lines started to bend. Michael's mercenaries, exhausted and terrified by the endless waves of enemies, began to panic. You could see it in their eyes, the realization that they were going to die here. The line was about to break. This is the moment where any sane commander would retreat, where a politician would mount a fast horse and flee to safety. Michael did neither. He saw his center collapsing. He grabbed a battle axe, some sources say a two-handed sword, and screamed for his personal guard. Then, in a moment of pure adrenaline-fueled insanity, the Prince of Wallachia charged directly into the Ottoman infantry. It wasn't symbolic. He crashed into the Turkish lines like a battering ram, personally killing several commanders in close combat. The sight of their prince, fighting like a demon in the front, ranks electrified the Wallachian troops. The panic evaporated instantly. They rallied behind him, pushing the Turks back onto the bridge. At the same time, a small detachment of Michael's troops, who'd secretly flanked through the deep swamp, appeared on the Ottoman rear, attacking their camp. The result was total collapse. Elite Ottoman discipline shattered. The invaders turned and ran. In the stampede, the wooden bridge collapsed under the weight of fleeing soldiers. Thousands drowned in the Neoglov River. Even Grand Vizier Sinan Pasha himself was knocked from his horse into the swamp. History records that this mighty commander had to be dragged out of the mud by his slaves, losing 2 teeth in the process. A force of 16,000 had broken an army of 100,000. It was militarily impossible, yet it happened. Michael had won the Battle of Călugăreni, but as the sun set and adrenaline faded, Michael looked at his casualties and did the cold math. He'd inflicted devastating losses, yes, but he'd also lost men he couldn't replace. The Ottomans, despite the disaster, still had tens of thousands of fresh troops. Michael faced a heartbreaking choice. He'd won the battle but couldn't hold the ground. That night, under cover of darkness, he ordered a retreat. He abandoned Bucharest. As he marched north toward the Carpathian Mountains, he saw smoke rising behind him. Sinan Pasha had entered the capital, converting churches into mosques. It looked like the end. But Michael was heading toward his allies, toward Sigismund Bathory and reinforcements. And in his mind, a new ambition was forming. Next time, he wouldn't just liberate a city. He'd redraw the map of Europe. October 1595. Michael and his battered army waited in the Carpathian mountain passes, watching their villages burn below. To the Ottoman commanders sitting in Bucharest, the war was over. They were already converting the city into a province, but they'd miscalculated. Michael wasn't hiding. He was recruiting. Sigismund Bathory finally arrived with 40,000 men, Hungarian cavalry, German mercenaries, Italian musketeers. For the first time, Michael wasn't the underdog. He was the spearhead of a crusader army. They descended from the mountains like an avalanche. The speed caught Sinan Pasha completely off guard. He didn't even try to hold Bucharest, realizing he was outnumbered and trapped. The Grand Vizier ordered a full retreat. But this wasn't an orderly withdrawal. It was a looting spree. The Ottoman army burned everything as they marched south, dragging thousands of Wallachian civilians in chains, men, women, children, destined for Istanbul's slave markets. They carried wagons loaded with stolen wealth. Michael chased them relentlessly, hounding their rear guard, turning retreat into panic. The chase ended at Giurgiu, the fortress city on the Danube's northern bank. To escape, Sinan Pasha's army had to cross a massive wooden bridge. When Michael's vanguard arrived, the crossing was already underway. The bridge was choked with wagons, cannons, soldiers, and thousands of weeping captives. Michael deployed artillery on the hills and opened fire. Cannonballs smashed into the packed bridge. Panic erupted. The bridge, groaning under immense weight and bombardment, collapsed with a deafening crash. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers, weighted down by stolen gold and armor, were pulled under the freezing Danube. The river turned red. Those trapped on the northern bank were massacred. Sinan Pasha, who'd barely crossed before the collapse, watched helplessly from the southern shore as his army was destroyed. He saw his cannons captured, his loot seized, and most importantly, thousands of Wallachian captives liberated. He returned to Istanbul in disgrace, stripped of rank. The Wallachian problem had become an Ottoman nightmare. For a brief moment, Michael was Christendom's most celebrated hero. Bells rang in Vienna and Prague. The Pope praised him as a defender of the faith. He'd done the impossible, taken a debt-ridden vassal state and crushed the Ottoman Empire's full might. But as smoke cleared, a colder reality set in. Michael looked at his ally, Sigismund Bathory. The Transylvanian prince hadn't helped from charity. He had a price. In exchange for aid, Michael had been forced to sign a treaty, making him technically a vassal of Transylvania. Michael the Brave was a hero, but also a subordinate. A king in all but name, yet on paper a servant to a less capable prince. The war for survival was over. The war for dominance was beginning. Michael was no longer just a rebel prince. He was a regional warlord with battle-hardened veterans, but the noose was tightening. To the south, the Ottoman Empire was healing, preparing for another round. To the north, Poland eyed his throne, and in Transylvania, the political situation imploded. Sigismund Bathory, Michael's unstable overlord, suddenly abdicated. His cousin, Cardinal Andrew Bathory, took power, a Polish puppet hostile to Michael. If Andrew secured power, Wallachia would be crushed between the Ottoman hammer and Polish anvil. Most rulers would fortify borders and pray. Michael did the opposite. He decided the best defense was total invasion. He sent a secret message to Emperor Rudolf II, asking for funding to remove the Polish usurper. He didn't wait for an answer. He gathered his army and turned west. This was suicidal. He was leaving his southern border exposed to Turks to attack a Christian neighbor. In October 1599, Michael launched his campaign through the Bucegi Mountains in a Hannibal-style crossing. His men dragged heavy cannons up steep, muddy ravines in freezing rain, moving with impossible speed. They emerged in Transylvania before the cardinal even knew they'd left Bucharest. Michael had an ace. He knew Transylvania's social fractures. The Sakli people, fierce warriors, had been reduced to serfdom by the Bathory family. Michael sent agents with a simple promise: fight for me, and I'll restore your freedom. Thousands of Saklis defected. Michael wasn't bringing just an army. He was bringing a revolution. The forces collided on the 28th of October 1599 at the Battle of Călugăreni near Sibiu. The cardinal's army was larger, filled with armored knights, but Michael had momentum. He opened with a terrifying artillery barrage followed by Cossack cavalry charges. The fight was brutal. The Transylvanian nobles, arrogant and disjointed, couldn't handle his veterans' ferocity. When Saklis, on the cardinal's side, saw their brothers fighting for Michael, morale collapsed. The lines broke. Andrew Bathory fled, but was hunted down 3 days later by Sakli peasants and hacked to death in a shepherd's hut. On the 1st of November 1599, Michael rode into Alba Iulia's citadel, not as a vassal, but as a conqueror. In the cathedral, he united the crowns. For the first time in history, a Wallachian prince ruled Transylvania. He was no longer just a voivode. He was the most powerful man in Eastern Europe, but shadows were lengthening, and the knives were coming out. Part 11. 3 crowns, 1 head. May 1600. Michael moved with the speed of a man knowing time was running out. He'd secured Wallachia and conquered Transylvania, but a stool can't stand on 2 legs. To the east lay Moldavia, ruled by Jeremiah Movila, a Polish puppet. Poland was gathering strength to crush Michael. He decided to strike first. He launched another lightning campaign, crossing the Milkov River into Moldavia with such speed that defenses evaporated. Polish and Moldavian troops, terrified by the reputation of the man who defeated Turks, scattered before the first cannon fired. Fortress Suceava surrendered. Capital Iași opened its gates. In 3 weeks, Michael achieved what centuries of kings failed to do. On the 6th of July, 1600, Michael issued a document with a seal that would become Romanian nationalism's holy grail. He titled himself Prince of Wallachia, Transylvania, and all of Moldavia. This was the impossible union. For the first time in history, the 3 Romanian-speaking principalities were united under one ruler. From the Tisa River west to the Dniester River east, Michael was absolute master. He'd defied Ottomans, outmaneuvered Habsburgs, and humiliated Poles. But look closely at this triumph, and you'll see cracks. The union was a military masterpiece, but political nightmare. Michael had built an empire, but not a state. He was ruling 3 countries with different laws, currencies, and nobilities who hated each other. The cost was astronomical. To maintain his mercenary army, the only thing keeping him in power, Michael needed rivers of money. The Ottoman treasury was closed. Emperor Rudolf, jealous of Michael's success, stopped subsidies. Michael was broke, desperate. He did the only thing possible. He turned on his own people. He raised taxes again. In Transylvania, the very saintly peasants who'd helped him win the throne, expecting freedom, were betrayed. Michael needed Hungarian nobility's support to govern, so he sided with nobles against peasants. He crushed the people who'd bled for him. The irony was tragic. To the outside world, Michael was a glorious crusader. To peasants, he was becoming a monster. Glory can't be eaten. Meanwhile, sharks circled. In Prague, Emperor Rudolf decided Michael had become too dangerous. In Warsaw, the Polish king was furious. Inside Michael's court, Transylvanian nobles sharpened knives. They began secret correspondence with Habsburg General Giorgio Basta. The impossible union lasted barely 4 months. It was a house of cards in a hurricane, and the floor was about to collapse. September 1600. The harvest moon rises over Transylvania, but there's no food to gather. The final storm has arrived. Hungarian nobles had never accepted Michael, a barbarian, usurper, Orthodox heretic, ruling Catholic and Protestant lords. When his treasury ran dry, they stopped smiling. They reached out to General Giorgio Basta, commander of Habsburg imperial forces. Basta was supposed to be Michael's ally, both fighting for the Holy Roman Emperor. But Basta was cold calculation personified. He saw Michael not as partner, but liability. When nobles proposed revolt, Basta didn't arrest them. He joined them. On the 18th of September, 1600, the sides met at the Battle of Miroslav. Michael brought his veterans. Basta brought imperial heavy infantry and rebellious Transylvanian knights. For the first time, Michael's luck ran out. Basta entrenched musketeers on a hill, creating a kill zone. Michael tried drawing them out, but Basta refused the bait. He forced Michael to attack uphill into a lead storm. When Michael's lines wavered, Basta unleashed heavy cavalry. It was slaughter. Michael watched 4,000 of his best men die. He barely escaped alive. But battlefield defeat was just the first domino. News of Michael's weakness spread like virus. To the north, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth saw their chance. Grand Chancellor Jan Zamoyski marched a massive Polish army into Moldavia. The Polish winged hussars, Europe's most terrifying cavalry, swept through in days. Then they didn't stop. They crossed into Wallachia. Michael raced south, trying to reach home before Poles did. Too late. The Wallachian boyars saw the writing on the wall. They betrayed him. They opened Bucharest's gates to the Polish army. In 30 days, one single month, Michael lost everything. Transylvania to Basta, Moldavia to Poles, Wallachia to traitors. The personal cost was even higher. His wife, Lady Stanka, and children were captured, thrown into dungeons, used as hostages. By November 1600, the King of Dacia was a fugitive with no army, no crown, no money, no family. He wandered Transylvania's frozen wilderness. hunted by the very men he'd liberated. Most men would surrender, but Michael made a decision defying all logic. He turned his horse west toward Prague. He was going to the Holy Roman Emperor himself. January 1601. Prague's streets are buried in snow. In Hradzani Castle's shadow, a man waits in a cramped inn, often unable to pay for meals. His clothes are worn and faded. He's dismissed most servants because he can't feed them. This is Michael the Brave. 6 months ago, he ruled an empire. Now he's just another refugee. He spends days writing letters to Emperor Rudolph, to the Pope, to the Grand Duke of Tuscany. Letters of desperation detailing his victories, reminding them how he saved Christendom, pleading for money, arms, a chance to free his imprisoned family. For months, the imperial palace doors remain closed. Emperor Rudolph II, an eccentric paranoid recluse, ignores him. To the Habsburg court, Michael is a has-been. But while Michael waits in Prague's cold, Transylvania spirals out of control. General Giorgio Basta, the man who defeated Michael, proved catastrophic as ruler. He didn't govern, he looted. His mercenaries treated Transylvanian nobility like conquered enemies. They burned villages, levied impossible taxes, instituted terror. Famine was so severe that chroniclers reported cannibalism. Hungarian nobles realized they'd made a terrible mistake. They'd traded Michael, a strict but capable ruler, for Basta, a plunderer. In desperation, they rebelled, inviting unstable former Prince Sigismund Bathory back to the throne. Suddenly, Emperor Rudolph had a crisis. Transylvania was in open revolt. Ottomans were massing on borders. General Basta was losing control. The emperor needed a miracle. A general who knew terrain, could inspire troops, and was crazy enough to fight a war already lost. He looked out his window at Prague and remembered the Wallachian waiting in the inn. In April 1601, palace doors finally opened. Michael was granted audience. It wasn't warm reunion. It was business transaction. Rudolph offered a deal. I'll give you money, a new army, help free your family, but you won't go as king. You'll go as my general. The cruel catch: Michael wouldn't command alone. He had to coordinate with the very man who destroyed him, General Giorgio Basta. Michael accepted. He had no choice. It was the only way to save his family. He rode out of Prague with executioner's grim determination. He raised fresh mercenaries, Silesians, Walloons, Cossacks who still remembered the legend. They marched fast through spring mud toward Transylvania. The reunion between Michael and Basta at a military camp was history's most tense moment. These men hated each other viscerally. They stared across the map table, forced by emperor's orders to shake hands. But they were professionals. They put hatred aside for the mission. Their target, Sigismund Bathory, who'd gathered 40,000 men near village Gorislow. On the 3rd of August 1601, the unholy alliance went to work. The Battle of Gorislow was Michael's final masterpiece. Bathory had high ground and numbers. Basta wanted to wait for artillery. Michael refused. He saw weakness in enemy deployment. Michael led the charge personally. Vintage Michael, aggressive, fast, violent. He smashed into Transylvanian lines, shattering formations. When enemies tried regrouping, Basta's heavy infantry moved in, perfect hammer and anvil. By sunset, rebellion was crushed. Transylvania was reconquered for the emperor. Michael and Basta stood together on the battlefield, victorious. To soldiers, Michael was the hero. They chanted his name. Basta watched this adulation with a stone face. He saw how troops looked at Michael. He saw the fire in Michael's eyes, the fire of a man already planning his next move. Michael believed he'd earned redemption. He was going home. He didn't know the order had already been written. He didn't know that for men like Basta and Rudolph, a hero is only useful until battle's won. Afterwards, he's just a threat. August 9, 1901. The Allied camp at Câmpia Târzi. days after crushing rebellion. The armies, resting, inside the command tent. Atmosphere is toxic. Michael feels wind in his sails. He's already issuing orders, planning to march south, then east. He believes he's earned his crown back. He acts like a prince, speaking over Basta. But General Giorgio Basta watches him with cold reptilian eyes. Basta knows a simple truth. 2 sharp swords cannot fit in one scabbard. He realizes Michael is uncontrollable. Jealousy combined with political paranoia is a death sentence. Basta sends a secret message to Walloon mercenary captains. Arrest him. If he resists, kill him. Early morning. Michael is in his tent, not wearing armor, not expecting enemies in his own camp. Suddenly, soldiers surround the tent. They're led by Captain Jacob Borbeli. They burst inside. Borbeli points his sword. You are my prisoner. Michael the Brave does not surrender. He shouts, "Is this how you act, you dogs?" and reaches for his sword. He's faster than them. He manages to draw his blade. But he's one man against a squad. Before he can strike, a halberd strikes from behind. Another soldier fires a pistol point blank. Michael falls. The restorer of Dacia, the man who defied 3 empires, bleeds out on a rug in a dusty tent, murdered not by Ottomans or Poles, but by his own allies. To ensure there's no coming back, mercenaries hack off his head with his own sword. Basta takes credit, justifying it as preemptive strike against a traitor. It was a lie. They take Michael's head, wrapped in cloth, placed on a dead horse's carcass, final insult. His body is stripped naked and left in dirt outside the tent for 3 days. This brutal end echoes another famous Wallachian ruler. A century earlier, Vlad the Impaler Dracula himself was also betrayed by Hungarian allies. His head sent as trophy to Istanbul. It seems the curse of Wallachian heroes, too large for their small country, consumed by the very powers they tried to balance. But something strange happened. Instead of destroying Michael's legend, the murder cemented it. When common soldiers saw the headless body of the man who'd given them victory, they didn't feel relief. They felt shame. A few loyal soldiers risked their lives, crept out at night to retrieve his body. They buried him in a shallow, unmarked grave, whispering prayers so Basta wouldn't hear. With Michael gone, the unity dream evaporated. Wallachia fell back into chaos. Transylvania descended into civil war. The Ottomans breathed relief, but the ghost of Michael the Brave was just beginning his journey. While his body was insulted, his head began its own journey. Retrieved by loyal captain Radu Florescu, carried swiftly across the Carpathian Mountains, brought home to Delu Monastery. There, beneath a cold stone slab, lies the only part of Michael the Brave that returned to his country. The tombstone inscription is heartbreakingly simple. Here lies the head of Michael, the great voivode, captured by envy. Envy. Not war, not disease, not age. Envy. For centuries, Michael was forgotten by the world, remembered only in peasant ballads as a tragic outlaw. The empires he fought, Ottomans, Habsburgs, Poles, wrote the history books with no interest in celebrating a rebel. But ideas are harder to kill than men. 300 years later, as modern Romania struggled to be born, historians looked back and found him. They saw the impossible union's map. They realized Michael wasn't just a medieval warlord. He was a prophecy. When Romania finally achieved its great union in 1918 after World War I, it was Michael's map they were redrawing. The Order of Michael the Brave became the country's highest military honor. The headless rider had finally won. But looking at his story today, Michael teaches us a darker lesson. He's the ultimate example of small nations' tragedy. A man of immense talent, a Napoleon before Napoleon was born, but cursed by geography, a giant, trapped in a room too small. His life forces us to ask, does history belong to the brave or to the accountants. Michael had bravery, but Sinan Pasha, Giorgio Basta, and Levantine creditors had the ledgers. In the end, the system won. The debt collectors won. The empires won. Or did they? The Ottoman Empire is gone. The Habsburg Empire is gone. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is gone. But the country Michael dreamed of, Romania, exists. In central Bucharest, his statue still stands, axe in hand, looking south toward the Danube, daring anyone to try taking his freedom again. The axe never fell on him in that square in 1593. And in a way, it never really fell at all. If you found Michael's story as intense as I did, smash that like button. Subscribe to Maproom Battles for more hidden history. Drop your take in the comments. Was Michael a visionary hero or a reckless gambler? I read everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next battle.